you with a little bonus content for the YouTube version, just some info that wasn't available at the time of recording. So here we go. Saturday's UFC on ESPN plus one event drew and announced 12,152 fans for a live gate of 1.23 million. Henry Cejudo, Donald Cerrone, and Alexander Hernandez each earned $50,000 bonuses for their performances at UFC on ESPN plus one event. In the case of Cerrone, it was ×2. Winners Cejudo and Cerrone both took home performance of the night bonuses, and Cowboy also received a fight of the night bonus along with Hernandez. Dana White, president of UFC, tweeted out some of the metrics by which ESPN and obviously he are both excited. 568,000 new ESPN Plus subscribers on Friday and Saturday. UFC and ESPN from the 8:15 to 10 o'clock block on ESPN got a 1.4 metered market rating, the highest rated UFC prelims on cable since at least 2013. So plenty to be excited about. It was a good card. A few things that I kind of was a little mixed up on when it came to this podcast, so I'm going to clean them up right here. I said at one point that MMA was not illegal in New York. Obviously, I meant it was not legal. I had some confusion about Paige Van Zandt's weight class. I thought she was 125 pounds and had gone up to meet Ostovich at 135 because I knew she'd gone up in weight. She was, in fact, 115 and went up to 125. Other than that, it was a pretty good conversation with Dan Doherty. A lot of fun, senior editor over at Cageside Press. Be sure and like this video, subscribe to the YouTube channel, blast me in the comments, whatever you got to do. Have some fun with it. I had some fun with it. We'll see you later and enjoy. Hello and welcome to the Sunday Morning Corerman, now on the Cageside Podcast Network, brought to you by CagesidePress.com. On this episode, we will talk about all the relevant fights of the very first UFC on ESPN card, UFC on ESPN plus one, Cejudo versus Dillashaw, which is an interesting name. I will do all this with my very special guest, senior editor at CagesidePress.com, the great Dan Doherty. Dan, how you doing?
Doing great. That was a great fight card and a great way to open up the ESPN era. I think so.
I agree. So let's kind of give it a proper introduction. It would have been hard to imagine just a mere 3 years ago that the Ultimate Fighting Championship would be fighting in Brooklyn, New York, with the sport not being illegal there, and fighting on ESPN. But both happened on Saturday night in the Barclays Center, a packed house, and many new ESPN Plus subscriptions paid for, at the very least in trial form, a high-profile card with high-profile ramifications. Going into this card, Dan, what did you think? Like, what were you expecting? Were you excited about it being on UFC? Was the Hardy Ostovich thing kind of overshadowing everything? What were your thoughts going in?
From the fight standpoint itself, this was a very well put together card. Like, there's just a lot of exciting matchups, and you have like that Greg Hardy question mark as far as what he's going to show in the cage. And yeah, it had those storylines going into it that were, harped on all week with the domestic violence issues that affected both Hardy and Ostovich going into this card. But the fights itself, those matchups, they were just so well put together. And on my podcast, Throwin Elbows, we always praise McMahon and Sean Shelby for their matchmaking abilities. And this is one of those cards because every fight on this card seemed great. And it showcased everything that you that you love about MMA. It had some wrestling matches, some fire fights, some quick knockouts. This is like the perfect fight card for like a new fan to watch. And that's just a great way to start this era.
That's true. It was well. Chael Sonnen said something interesting, and I find myself deferring to him in a lot of ways because as I get older, I can sort of cut through the bullshit and figure out exactly when he's trying to play me and when he's not. And one of the things he said is that MMA's changed, and especially in the UFC, where all these cards are on different channels or different mediums. They start on Fight Pass, and then they used to go to Fox Sports 2 or Fox Sports 1 or whatever. And he said, really, the way the UFC builds it now is like, Cowboy and Alex Hernandez were the main event of that particular card, and they just all happen to happen on the same night.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting in the way that they're framing these things, trying to bring in, viewers and all that. It really was a great card. So let's start at the top of it with the big fight. The term super fight gets thrown around, but when flyweight champion Henry the Messenger Cejudo met bantamweight champion TJ Dillashaw with both of their respective divisions basically cleaned out, it was a super fight in every sense of the word, well, except for the outcome. Cejudo came in with a solid game plan, found Dillashaw's chin early, rocked him, had him on roller skates, and finished him in the very first round. So let's start with the stoppage, Dan. Did you feel it was a quick stoppage? I think, in my personal opinion, I think you have to hold off a little longer in championship fights. But what'd you think?
You look back on UFC 217 where Dillashaw was on roller skates against Cody Garbrandt. He was given a chance and ended up knocking out Cody in the next round. So he obviously has that ability to recover from those, tough moments. But this fight, he's cutting 10 extra pounds. He's in a weaker state. So maybe you don't give him that leash that he was given at UFC 217, I think. So I don't have too many problems with the stoppage because Henry Cejudo was on a rampage. He was running right through TJ Dillashaw. And I honestly did not see him recovering. You like to see the fighters get a chance, but overall, I really didn't have a problem with the stoppage. I think that was Henry Cejudo's fight all the way through.
And conventional wisdom has always been that it's easy to protest a fight when someone pulls a guy off of you who probably would have hit you with, if he hit you with 5 strikes, he would have hit you with 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, potentially. Yeah. So it's easy to protest in that way. All right, Cejudo says his next fight should be at 135 pounds for Dillashaw's belt. The feeling after the fight was that Cejudo saved the flyweight division, but now we're in a weird situation where if he goes after TJ's belt, does the division still end up getting killed? I mean, should Cejudo rematch Benavidez? What do you think the next move is for Henry Cejudo, and does he have a responsibility to save this division?
Oof, man, that's tough because that storyline does, play itself into putting Henry Cejudo at 135 and having him fight TJ Dillashaw for that belt. But you also got Joseph Benavidez looking great tonight, and you have Jussier Formiga fighting pretty soon. He's got a fight scheduled, so the flyweight division's not exactly dead yet. They do have some fights scheduled down the road, and I think there are options. If you want to keep Cejudo down there, you give him the winner of that Formiga fight in the future, or just go with Benavidez because he was great, and they have unfinished business with that controversial decision that Benavidez took from him. So there are options, but I think the right one is capitalize on this. Make him fight TJ Dillashaw. Try to get another 2-time champion like they just did now.
And here's what we know. I mean, you spoke about it. Sean Shelby and McMahon are fantastic matchmakers. Dana White's an amazing strategist. So the one thing I have to admit, I'm usually pretty savvy with this stuff. The one thing I didn't see coming was that if Cejudo won, it would still mean him going to 35 because of the rematch. I guess I don't know, if TJ had won, obviously you killed the division. But if now Cejudo wins and the rematch is at 35, yeah, I mean, maybe Dana White saw that the whole way. I sort of felt like, and we'll get to this a little bit later, that I felt like Benavidez's fight with Ortiz was kind of a swan song a little bit for the division. Like, here's a guy, and we'll wait till we get to the Benavidez fight to really get into that. But I that's kind of how I felt. All right, let's move on to the co-main event. Many questioned Greg Hardy's inclusion in this event and felt that he was being served up Alan Crowder to further a career he shouldn't even have. He looked himself in the first, but Crowder did score a takedown and started to wear down Hardy. The fight went into the second, and Hardy actually listened to his coaches, slowed his pace. But apparently when he was listening to his coaches and training very hard, he completely skipped reading the rule book because an illegal strike caused him to be disqualified midway through the second. The fight kind of left us feeling weird. He lost, but not the way most wanted him to, so there's really no closure. So I guess, first of all, what'd you think of the performance? I mean, Crowder was yelling. It really was a crazy fight. I mean, you saw Hardy in some positions we don't normally see him, and we saw Crowder yelling at him. It was just a whole weird situation. What was your takeaway from a fight that many felt going in, like they needed to take a shower after? How do you feel?
I think that, like, everything that happened was just so perfect so perfectly representative of the build up to this fight. No one really wants to see Greg Hardy win, but damn, it's going to be pretty fucking cool to see him in the octagon because he was an excellent NFL player, like all pro. So, and then to have him get yelled at, that sets him off. He loses by disqualification. It really puts a cherry on top of this really weird saga of having in a main event on ESPN, your first event on that network. So I like how it ended up, and I did enjoy the fight as a whole because it was really fun. Crowder was down to throw down, and Hardy was really getting tested, and it didn't go the way he wanted to because he wanted that first minute knockout, as you saw the way he came out really quickly. But I really like the way it turned out, and I thought the finish was just a storybook ending to this really weird build up to Greg Hardy's debut.
A storybook ending to a weird story. And it's interesting that, and again, you said it earlier, and I'm coming back to it again, is that Mick Maynard and Sean Shelby are such great matchmakers that had Hardy not delivered that illegal knee, this is really a hell of a fight. I mean, he's tested, and he comes out. I mean, listen, you couldn't get a better coach than Dean Thomas. He actually listens to him, despite kind of getting barked on a little bit by Crowder. I mean, Crowder's yelling at him may have led to the illegal knee. We don't know. We don't know what's going through Greg Hardy's mind. Yeah. Us not knowing what's going through Greg Hardy's mind might be the understatement of all time. But I think that, it really was the right guy to be in there. I guess I thought Crowder was getting served up, but all right. Let's kind of finish up the Hardy discussion by just saying this. Listen, he's clearly going to be around, right? So what can we expect moving forward? I mean, do they give him a guy who's a better fighter? Do they give him – I mean, I don't think you rematch Crowder. No. So what's next for Hardy?
I'm sure they'll find something. There's a lot of raw potential there because he's such an excellent athlete. He's huge. He hits with a lot of power, and – if you can refine that down the road, you got a force to be reckoned with. So I'm sure they have someone. I think you got to go a step down from Crowder from here. They'll find someone from the Contender Series in all likelihood that can step in there with Hardy. And people will be willing to do it. I mean, I'm sure there are people that want to lay their hands on him. So there won't be a shortage of people lining up to fight him. So they'll figure it out.
I'm sure they will. All right, let's move on. The 15th ranked New York native Gregor Gillespie has a world-class resume as a wrestler. He brought an undefeated record to the Barclays Center to face veteran stud Hawaiian Yancy Medeiros, and it was never close. Medeiros got off one strike. Let me say that again. Medeiros got off one strike. Gillespie owned the fight, and he showed once again that he may be the future at a division that really is stacked. I mean, if you ever wanted to see a guy in a division who fights like him, I mean, there's Ben Askren's, it could be Nurmagomedov. I mean, this is the division, right? So what did you think about first Gillespie's performance? I mean, it's hard to say to pick anything negative about it, but where is he at in the division? He's ranked 15th. Talent-wise, is he higher than that? What do you want to see from him moving forward?
I love Gregor Gillespie. I'm from Long Island. He's from Long Island. I support him, and I love his fighting style. It's just his wrestling is so far ahead of nearly everyone else in that division, aside from Khabib maybe, or maybe you throw in a Kevin Lee in there too. But his wrestling is just so good, and he just smothers people. So I think he does have top 10 talent. He just needs the names to get up there. So he gets to step up in competition after this one for sure. It's definitely a ranked opponent, maybe in that 10 to 15 range, because Yancy Medeiros is right outside those rankings. So he definitely has a great future. He's a future title contender for sure. And it doesn't matter if his striking is raw. He smothers people. He doesn't need that striking. So I'm a big fan of his, and I think he's a future title contender very soon.
Let's talk about if you were in Sean Shelby's shoes or Mick Maynard's shoes. Do you think a guy, because the way that the rankings sort of fall, two guys that might be on a collision course based on how they're ranked would be Alex Hernandez and Gregor Gillespie. Hernandez was ranked 11th, Gillespie's 15th, and they could meet, somewhere at around 13. Do you think, are you from the school that if you have two prospects, you have them avoid each other? I got into conversations with Jordan Colbert and some other guys in previous podcasts about, like, you keep Paulo Costa and Israel Adesanya away from each other. Yeah. But I'm an old school guy. I mean, I remember that when when GSP was coming up, he fought studs. And when all these guys were coming up in the old days, now the divisions weren't as thick as they are now. There wasn't many guys fighting. But where's your stance on that? I mean, do you test him skill-wise, or do you have him fight another prospect or an older fighter? What do you think should be next for him?
Well, I mean, if Alex Hernandez didn't lose tonight, I would be, on that frame of mind where you don't want them fighting each other. But he ended up losing to Don Cerrone. So you have Gregor Gillespie now as the prospect at 155. So you keep moving on up. I mean, there's veterans out there for him to fight. Dan Hooker's going to be out for a while, but Francisco Trinaldo, he's got a fight lined up. So maybe after that one, you can give him something. I like that Islam Makhachev. He's at 15th right now. That's a really good technical matchup because they're both smothering grapplers. So there's options for Gregor Gillespie, and I think you just stay in that 10 to 15 range because once you get 1 to 10, those are really skilled guys, and I don't think he's quite ready for that coming off a win against Yancy Medeiros.
This is just such a great division. I mean, I hope, they've talked about how they're going to handle it, and now it gets tricky with the money being involved. The whole notion of, and I don't want to get too far down the road with this division, but with the whole Khabib, Conor, Dustin Poirier, Tony Ferguson sort of semifinal they've talked about. Yeah. But there's just so much here. I mean, I wouldn't mind seeing Gillespie against James Vick. I wouldn't mind, there's just so much. Like you said, once you get in the top 10, I mean, I don't think Gillespie's ready for a guy like Anthony Pettis, but, who knows what Anthony Pettis – I mean, he's like Khabib in the sense that he has this one thing that's so much better than everybody else that the question becomes, can that one thing nullify whatever anyone else can do? All right, let's move on to the fight we talked about earlier and what may be one of the last fights at 125 pounds in the UFC for the foreseeable future. The second-ranked Joseph Benavidez won an uninspired fight against the 8th-ranked Dustin Ortiz. This fight didn't keep me on the edge of my seat or blow me away. What can we take away from this fight? And listen, in saying that, it was a night of fascinating fights. So, I mean, I don't want to discredit these guys. It was a fairly good back-and-forth fight. It was just, I don't know, like the history of this division is some pretty high-paced fights, and I just didn't get the sense in that. What do you think? Am I totally off here?
I mean, I do have to disagree with you here because
yeah.
Like I said earlier, this fight card had everything, and this was the perfect style of grappling fight that you want to see. There's that style of Gregor Gillespie, it's just dominating someone. Then there's this where it's back and forth. Each guy has their moments. They're rolling, and each guy's top position back and forth. So that was as entertaining as a grappling centric fight gets, and I think that's great for new fans to see. And it was an excellent matchup, a lot more competitive than their first match, which was 4 years back. So I really appreciated this, and I thought it was very representative of flyweights, where it is mainly fought on the ground. There's not much going on the feet, but there's still really high pace. Scrambles, and there's just always something going on in that 125-pound division. So
yeah, maybe I was just expecting more on the feet. I apologize for cutting you off. Maybe I was just expecting more on the feet. But let me ask you this though. So what does this mean for the flyweights? I mean, do you think I alluded to it earlier, and now we can get fully into it. Do you think that this was sort of I don't know if swan song's the right way to put it for Joseph Benavidez. I jokingly tweeted that he's sort of a company man, and I mean that in a good way, that this was maybe Dana White's way of sort of saying, hey, here's one more paycheck, here's one more, fight in this division, we'll put you on this card, that the big super fight's going to be, so that after the card, we can kind of talk about maybe you're going to fight the winner if it's Henry. I mean, what do you expect out of this division? I mean, I don't think anybody wants it to go away, but it seems like that's the way we're heading, huh?
Yeah, it kind of does, because there was this fight, the main event, and then there's Formiga versus Figueiredo down the road at UFC Nashville. Those are the flyweight fights that are at near the top of the division that are going on right now, and so yeah, I don't want to see it go away, but when you chop out half a division like they did, and a couple of those guys in the top 15, it's really tough to see what the future is. But you have a clear top contender in Joseph Benavidez right now, and he does have that unfinished business with Henry Cejudo. So there is, life that they can squeeze out of that flyweight division if they want to. But I mean, what we've seen from the UFC, they'd rather probably see it go. I don't know.
It's weird. We've sort of moved, and I get it, with the whole WME, IMG buying the UFC. We've sort of moved into this thing where it's almost like guys are fighting on commission, and if you're around based on what you can bring in, and that's sort of not the way sports and historically the UFC's been set up. I mean, obviously Conor McGregor gets a lot of people paid, right? Khabib Nurmagomedov, John Jones, and GSP when he fought Bisping, Daniel Cormier. There's guys that really get everyone else paid. No one tunes in for certain fighters, but you have to have a roster. But I think that there is an important. I always thought, and let me get your thoughts on this. I understand why they didn't do it, but when they bought up all these other companies like Pride and Strikeforce and WEC, I always thought there was some value in continuing those organizations in name and letting certain things occur in those organizations. Like, having a Pride exist in Japan, or still having the fighters fight in a WEC that are lower weight fighters, and having that be branded in that way. I mean, I understand why they did it, but I don't know. I don't want to get too dramatic here, but it's kind of sad if the flyweight division goes away. No.
Yeah, it is. It is because I mean, they did let that they did have the WC for a while, and they let that run its course until they eventually absorbed it and then made those divisions the UFC divisions, which was just a great way to introduce those divisions, to have those champions just come over, have their belts and everything. And then with the flyweight division, they did like the kind of the bare minimum ish. They did that whole season with Demetrius Johnson of Tough, where they bring in the champions of a bunch of other organizations, have them have a tournament to see who fights Demetrius Johnson. And then kind of after that, nothing really built off of that. You got a great fight out of Tim Elliott versus Johnson. And after that, not much. You got some guys to fill out cards. But they never really gave the flyweights the time of day, even though the great majority of those fights, very entertaining. They're the fastest paced guys on the roster. So it's just that complex of fans. They don't want to see guys smaller than them fighting. So it kind of just happened that way.
You know, in retrospect, when you look back, that Tough season almost served to just it was the UFC's way to say, or to see, is there anybody out here in the world of MMA that can compete with Demetrius Johnson? And if there's not, then let's just get rid of the division. All right, Paige Van Zandt, moving on. Paige Van Zandt found herself in the unenviable position of ruining the night of the person who pretty much everyone was rooting for. Rachel Ostovich's out-of-cage domestic violence assault had everyone pulling for her, and while Van Zandt may have not been the heroic figure in everyone's eyes, she sure fought heroically, getting completely controlled on the ground by Ostovich. For most of the fight, Van Zandt kept scrambling, and after going after a leg or a foot early on, she ultimately found Ostovich's arm and yanked it until the Hawaiian tapped. Some say there is no such thing as a moral victory, but I think both women look good and represent themselves well, both as fighters and women. Where do these girls fall in the hierarchy at 135? I mean, neither's ready for a title shot for sure. But I mean, I thought Ostovich was the bigger fighter, was a stronger fighter. She looked that way early, but Paige kept bringing it. I mean, for all the things people want to take away from Paige, she's a fighter, man. She gets in there and mixes it up.
Just 125 for the record. You said 135, but
that's right.
Yeah. This was a great fight. This was a very, very good fight. Rachel Ostovich looked excellent. She was taking down Paige at will. And I mean, Paige she's always had potential. And if she can put it together, then she'll be something special. But I didn't see it in this fight. I mean, she was able to scramble, and that's always been an ability of hers, is just getting in those dirty areas and scrambling, getting up in top position and in situations like that. And that's how she ended up getting that armbar. She bucks Ostovich off of her, then takes her back, and then eventually gets an armbar out of Ostovich's defense, where she kind of stuck her arms up in the air, and Van Zandt got one. So it was a very good fight. And I think I just didn't see that improvement from Van Zandt that I wanted to see. It was just a very well fought fight for Ostovich, and she just got caught in a submission.
So sort of put an ending on the whole Ostovich Hardy thing. Do you think the UFC should have came to her not rescue, but like, I feel like they put her in an awkward position, making her be the one that had to speak out. And I mean, she's certainly not vested enough in the company to start dictating who's going to fight when. So she almost had to co-sign on it in a way. Do you think they should have just let her not have that extra thing hanging over her, or what?
It was going to hang over her regardless. I mean, that she was booked on the card first, and then they booked Hardy. Then they asked her about it. She was on the card. They book Hardy, and then they say, "Hey, Rachel, you okay with us booking Hardy? Because we already did." And I mean, what's she going to say? Like, no, don't do that. And then they have to like change things and throw things around. That's not the UFC's MO. So they wanted both of those fights on this card. So I mean, good on Rachel for, just being the bigger person and fighting through that and really handling all the media questions greatly. She said she wasn't interested in talking about it, and every time she got a question, she gave the right answer. And just, she didn't make a really big deal out of things when everyone wanted to make a big deal out of it. So she focused on the fight and gave a great performance, but unfortunately just couldn't come out with a W.
So I know where I was confused earlier. Ostovich being the bigger fighter. Van Zandt used to fight at 115. Now she went up to 125.
Yes.
Ostovich has been at 125 the whole time. She was the bigger fighter, I guess I thought that Van Zandt started at 125. Either way, do you think that Ostovich this is a good weight class for her? Or do you think that she just looked impressive because of the size difference? Where do you think she's at as a fighter? I guess is a better question.
I mean, she's not going to make it to 115. So I think 125 is the right division for her. She's strong, and I think she would be undersized at 135. So 125 is perfect for her. And she has good abilities, but she's been caught in submissions before. So because she has that good wrestling game, if she can just iron out that submission defense, I think she has potential, but she's young. She's only got nine fights now on her record. So there's not much to her career so far, and I think down the road she can be something, but right now she's just a solid fighter, has some good wrestling skills, but isn't gonna make noise in the top 15 anytime soon.
All right, moving on. Former contract winner on Dana White's Tuesday Night Contender Series at 205 pounds, Carl Roberson has been making his bones at 185, but a return to 205 for an opportunity to fight former title contender Glover Teixeira. Roberson came out gunning and had Teixeira pretty much out, but you don't get a resume like Glover's by just rolling over to young lions. Teixeira stayed strong, found the mount, ultimately an arm triangle, finishing Roberson in the first. At this point in Glover's career, he's put in most fights to have a young fighter potentially look good and get a bigger name on his resume. You think it's time for the legend, quote unquote, legends division for Glover? Does he have another title run left in him? What do you think?
I mean, he can still beat these guys.
Yeah.
So I think he's not going to. I don't think he's going to make a title run. But and this is 205 after all, where it's a pretty thin division. But I don't want to see him go against a guy like Dominic Reyes, who's like he's just a world beater right now, or Volkan Oezdemir. So I think he's in a good spot of gatekeeper. He's a perfect gatekeeper for that 205-pound division. He has a lot of experience, a lot of skills. He can grapple, he can strike with the best of them. So I think this was a great kind of fight for him, where Roberson is on the way up and wanted to give him a test. So you give him Glover Teixeira. He did not pass that test. He almost did, but Glover out-veteraned him.
I like the way you put that, because really Glover's at the point now where he's a guy that you keep away from guys can fight, but you make him fight guys you're not sure can fight. And then he's the guy who's like, I mean, you hit on it with gatekeeper, but I think even more than that, he's the guy that defines who these guys are. Do we have something in this guy or not quite yet? Can he beat a guy who, he has the skills and the athleticism maybe, but, is he going to leave openings that a guy like Glover Teixeira can capitalize on? Yeah. All right, let's talk about the prelim card. Cowboy Donald Cerrone took on Alexander the Great Hernandez. Coming into this fight, a lot of casuals may be surprised to find out that it was Cowboy Donald Cerrone who was an unranked underdog in his fight with Alexander the Great Hernandez, partly because he switched weight classes. The 11th ranked Hernandez came up looking to push the fight and had some early success. However, the veteran Cerrone worked behind a counter and also at times lead right, and some solid body work both with knees and kicks to slow Hernandez and eventually break him. He found the finish in the second. So much of fighting comes down to what one fighter thinks of the other. I know this sounds crazy, Dan, but did Hernandez sleep on Cowboy a little bit?
I mean, the way he was talking to him in the lead up, I wouldn't be surprised if he did. He probably expected this to go the similar way that the Dariush fight went, because he had that same strategy, just bull rush the guy, try to overwhelm him and get that quick finish. But Cerrone took the best shots, and he almost shot my mic there. But Cerrone took those two huge left hands in the beginning of the fight, and then after that, it was just all Cerrone. Those takedowns, beautiful, like just 3 in a row, boom, boom, boom. And then Hernandez gets up from that, a little tired, then Cerrone, boom, combo. For the rest of the fight, he's just hitting combination after combination, and Hernandez had no answer. And then the big turning point, I think, was that intercept knee where Hernandez was coming in, the big knee hits him from Cerrone, and after that, it was just – there was nothing from Hernandez and offensive-wise. So, yeah, I just love the performance from Don Cerrone. I would not be surprised if Alex Hernandez was overlooking him. Just thought he was fighting some old man.
And it's interesting. When I saw the early part of the fight, I saw Hernandez was coming out, kind of going after him, and I was like, okay, I like this because, Donald Cerrone's a guy who likes to get set, likes to really, go through his motions and sort of have the pace be his. and Hernandez wasn't going to give that to him. But I was impressed because, like I said, when Cerrone started working those counters and those lead right hands, I was like, all right, he's going to let this kid come to him. And then slowly but surely, he's going to make him regret coming towards him.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to let him know that you do not just chase after me without there being consequences.
Yeah.
And he established that, and I think that really turned the tide. Cerrone looked good. After the fight, Conor McGregor tweeted that Cerrone has now earned a fight with Conor McGregor. Number one, does that fight interest you? And number two, do you think it'll ever happen?
Hey, why not? Why not? I mean, Dad Cerrone is unstoppable. I mean, those two fights he's had since, his child was born, he dominates Mike Perry on the mat, and then he just runs through Alex Hernandez. So he's a different fighter. We're seeing prime cowboy once again. So I think if there was a time to make Cerrone versus McGregor, why not make it now? I know Iaquinta wants that fight, and that would be a great fight. Iaquinta and McGregor, but hey, McGregor and Cerrone, they can build up a fight. People know who Donald Cerrone is. He's main evented plenty of cards in the past. He's one of the best to ever do it. He's a Hall of Famer for sure. So I think that's a great fight to make. It would be a great build up, and would probably sell a lot of pay-per-views.
This is the fascinating thing about Conor McGregor, and I mean, obviously can't talk MMA without him coming up at some point, but there's, like you just said, there's two, and then a third fight. I mean, all fights are fascinating. I mean, I really have no interest in another Khabib fight for a while. I need to see some different stuff out of Conor before I want to see him fight Khabib again. But Poirier, I'd like to see. I'd like to see Iaquinta, and I'd like to see Cerrone. And I think Cerrone would probably be the one that made the most money. So yeah. I think that's probably what Conor's going after. And Chael brought up a good point on one of his podcasts. He said this is kind of giving you an understanding of where Conor's at. Is he still chasing belts? If he's chasing belts, then he's going to advocate for a Poirier fight.
Yeah.
If he's not, then he's going to make some money with Cerrone. He could probably still angle a fight with Khabib if he fought and looked impressive against Iaquinta. So I think which way he goes is going to kind of let us know where Conor's at.
Yeah.
All right, this is the last one really of note, and then you can talk about whatever prelims you like. Joanne Calderwood. So the Violence Queen, Ariane Lipski, came into her UFC debut with 4 losses, but none of them have occurred since March 2015. Lipski, with a ton of hype behind her, took on JoJo Calderwood, who coming in just seemed like she was going to be the B-side of Lipski's coming out party. Mm-hmm. That's not how it went down, as the fight was Calderwood's throughout. Did the UFC sleep on Calderwood a little, or maybe think she was done prematurely? Calderwood at her best is a tall order for someone's debut. So yeah. What was the matchmaking here? What do you think? Did they think too highly of Lipski or too poorly of Calderwood?
Maybe it was one of those gatekeeper situations like Glover and Roberson, because Roberson had a lot of potential, but he was given a tough test. And Calderwood, she's a great fighter. She's always been a great fighter, but she has that issue with that first rush, and Lipski tried to, exploit her with that. Goes at her right away. And then after that, it was just all Calderwood. So I think they might have been overlooking Calderwood. There was this whole JoJo 2.0 thing going into this fight. And now, hey, I believe it. This is a brand new Joanne Calderwood. She's a different fighter. She's ready to contend at flyweight. And this proves it. Ariane Lipski had a lot of hype going into this fight behind her. And Calderwood proved that, hey, you're not ready for the big time yet. So I think Calderwood is ready to contend at flyweight, and the UFC can take note of that, because there was a whole tweet from Dana White just dedicated to Ariane Lipski. So the UFC wanted Lipski to succeed, but you don't give her an opponent like Calderwood if you want that to happen.
All right, rounding out the big ESPN card, Alonzo Menefield defeated Vinicius Moreira by TKO via strikes in round 1. Corey Sandhagen defeated Mario Bautista by submission via armbar, also in round 1. On the initial preliminary card, Dennis Bermudez defeated Tay Edwards by unanimous decision, 30-26, 30-26, 30-26. Jeff Neal defeated Bilal Muhammad by unanimous decision, 29-28, 30-27, 30-27. And Chance Contre defeated Kyle Stewart by submission via rear naked choke in round number 1. On a personal note, other than Henry Cejudo, I live in Phoenix. It was not a great night for Arizona with Bautista, Edwards, and Stewart losing. Anything else of interest to you? The Tay Edwards thing, obviously, he's at the lab. The lab is literally 10 minutes from my house. So that was of some interest to me. I felt like I was expecting a little bit more out of him than I got. But Bermudez is I was surprised after losing they gave him Bermudez, but
Yeah.
what any of those fights stick out to you or no?
I mean, I enjoyed the ESPN portion of the card. Like if that, like those 4 fights were amazing to put on big ESPN. Like you get that flying knee to submission from Corey Sandhagen. You get the huge knockout from Alonzo Menefield, where he just looked amazing. And then you get the great fight between Calderwood and Lipsky, and you cap it off with the Cerrone performance. Those are 4 amazing fights to put on big ESPN for the first time. That's how you make a debut, not how they debuted on Fox a couple years back, where it was, the 30-second fight between Cain Velasquez and Junior Dos Santos, preceded by 45 minutes of desk talk. That wasn't how to do it. This was how to debut on a network. And then I just want to give a note on Dennis Bermudez because he's a Long Islander. So am I. Great career. He retired after this fight. And I love that he got to retire on top because he was skidding towards the end. He had some tough decisions not go his way. He had 4 straight losses going to this fight, moved up to lightweight for this fight, and got a big win. He looked great. His takedowns were so smooth in this fight, and he looked like prime Dennis Bermudez again. But unfortunately wanted to call it quits. He had some stuff going on with his family. His uncle, he said, has cancer, so it was time to call it quits for him. And just want to give him props for a great career because he had that one point where he had 7 wins in a row in that featherweight division. That is no easy task to do. So great career for a great fighter. Props to Dennis Bermudez.
All right, I'll get you out of here on a rapid fire, and I'll let you just have the last word on what you thought about the card. A few things. Stephen A. Smith, like him, not like him on a UFC card.
I kind of loved it. He stayed in his lane. He didn't overstep his boundaries, really. He said what he knew. He said what he learned about this card. And I like that when he was standing up with Cormier and Anik, he talked about those 10 pounds. He didn't overstretch. He didn't say anything out of his realm of knowledge. So I thought he did a great job at, not embarrassing himself up there. So I thought that was a really good move. It was a familiar face for people who were just watching for the first time. And I thought he did a great job.
I heard somebody compliment Stephen A. one time, and they said, the amount of things he has to know about just to be on First Take, right? And also I saw Josh Gross earlier this evening tweeted that he was standing next to Stephen A. Smith at like UFC 47. So the guy's been around the sport a lot longer than people may think. He's smart enough to know that he doesn't have to overextend himself, like you said. Trevor Whittman, what'd you think about him in the booth?
That was pretty cool. I mean, he'll get more comfortable behind the mic as time goes on, but I thought that was a cool perspective where they come out of the corner and you get a cornerman's perspective of what was heard in that exchange. So I thought that was a very good idea because that's a big aspect of fights that normally don't get seen on television because we're usually in commercial breaks. So you have a cornerman break down what he heard in the corner, but I don't know how often they can do that because he has fighters himself. So, are they just going to get different coaches? Is it going to be a rotating core of coaches that are going to come on to the broadcast? I don't know how that's going to work, but I really like that addition.
It was interesting, and I think it's a different take on it. I would be interested to see if those coaches are willing to call out other coaches. That would make it really interesting. Like if they're willing to say, "I would have told my fighter something different." Because the fighters are.
That, actually.
A couple of times, depending on who's willing to, take shots. I saw that Ariel and Chael did a pre-fight show, like on Periscope or I don't know where it was being broadcasted. But then they have Karen Bryant and Evans and Bisping. Do you kind of seem like that's oversaturated? Do you think that they should just let Ariel host? Do you like the Bryant sort of Fox vibe, or do you think Ariel and Chael can handle it and that's what they should go with?
I think it comes down to just, their lanes. And Karen Bryant is an excellent host. That's what she does. Helwan is a reporter. He hosts shows, but he's not the kind of desk host that Karen Bryant is. She brings something different to the table. And Chael Sonnen brings something different to the table than Evans or Bisping do. So I think that they have people in the right roles. And I like that they have the desk. They have Ariel and Chael doing their thing because it's just they're all serving different purposes. And I think just to have them all just makes this more of a complete experience when you're watching fights.
So we're one card in, and it's 100% unfair, but I'm going to ask you this anyway. Do you like the product on ESPN better than on Fox?
100%. And just for the basis of pacing. This card ended at like 12:30. This was a 2.5-hour card for a 6-fight main card. That's unbelievable. I mean, 12:30 for me. I'm on the East Coast. But but the 2.5 hours for a 6-fight main card, that was unheard of. There would be cards ending at like 1:30 in the Fox Sports 1 era. So just the pacing of the main card was unbelievable. I thought the production elements were very good. It was very similar to Fox. They had new graphics and things like that. But overall, I enjoyed the product being on ESPN. They also in the lead up to this fight, they did an excellent job of promoting. They had this fight everywhere. They were promoting this everywhere. Every show was talking about UFC. They had the promos on the side. There were NBA announcers saying, like, make sure you watch UFC Fight Night, Brooklyn this weekend. And I just can't wait to see what they're going to do for, like, the big ESPN card, the Ngannou versus Velasquez card, because that's on ESPN, not ESPN Plus. So they did just a great job overall.
Yeah, it's interesting. This is going to be – and the funny thing about the UFC is that things have kind of happened in the way they should when you're growing a sport. They're in a much smaller time frame than, like, the NFL or something like that, who's been around much longer. But, things like getting a endorsement deal with Reebok. People aren't crazy about it, but it's part of, like, I watched an old fight the other day where fighters were wearing whatever they wanted to. It seemed weird. So they had that. Yeah. And then they had Fox to work out the kinks, I don't know that – I mean, they were always good at putting on a show. But now it's like they're 100% ready to be dealing with ESPN. Like, they are a high class. And I think – I'm just going to tell you this so that I can be on record as saying it. When I saw Max Kellerman has a boxing show now on ESPN Plus, I think ESPN Plus is coming for DAZN. I think that's what ESPN Plus is going to be about. I think it's going to be the ESPN's answer. They're going to sign fighters, and they're basically in a year or two, it's going to amount to, if you'd merged Fox Sports 1 with HBO Boxing, it's going to be ESPN Plus. I think that's what's next. And I think if that's the case, then DAZN's going to have a lot of trouble because Bellator and Canelo it's going to be tough to compete with. All right. Someday when I ask this of all my guests, we recap shows. I'll be doing this a lot sooner than you will, but someday when your grandson's sitting on your knee and you tell him about the first time UFC was on ESPN, what do you think's going to stick out to you? What are the things you're going to tell him?
Yeah, that's a long way in the future. I'm 22 years old. Like, what sticks out about this card, it was just the perfect introduction to an era. Like, you can say the opposite about how the first UFC on Fox card went. Like this. They learned from their mistakes at UFC on Fox, and they just put on an amazing fight card, and it was perfect. Everything worked. The pacing, it was just beautiful, and the fights were just out of this world, fantastic. We got a great championship fight too. So I think this you look back on this one, and you can really solidify this as the beginning of a new era.
Couldn't have said it better myself. All right, so go ahead and tell everyone where they can follow you, what you're working on, where you can be read, all that stuff.
I'm the senior editor of Cageside Press, as you said at the top of the show. On Twitter, I am at Dan Doherty MMA, and my podcast with co-writer Heath Harshman will be getting back up in February. That is Throwin Elbows MMA. You can find us on SoundCloud, Stitcher, and Google Play, all that good stuff. So, all right, there's that.
All right, guys, I can't imagine why you wouldn't follow and listen to this young man after everything he's just told you and all his perfect insight for the fights that we just watched. There will be plenty of content at the newly formed Cageside Press Podcast Network. Everything that you loved about the MMA Today Podcast Network will be coming over to the Cageside Press Podcast Network. We'll be coming out with content constantly. I'm constantly reaching out to people to do all kinds of podcasts. I have a podcast called The Splendid Science of MMA that I will be doing with Dean Thomas before you know it. And if you don't think Greg Hardy's going to come up, if you don't think Amanda Nunes is going to come up, if you don't think Dana White's relationship with Tyrone Woodley is going to come up, you are crazy. I will talk to Dean about all those things, and that podcast will be coming soon. My thanks again to Dan, the great Dan Doherty, who I just got introduced to this evening, and he was amazing. We'll be doing much more podcasts in the future. All right, guys, tell your friends, tell your family, tell everybody about the Cageside Press Podcast Network. Talk to you later. Peace.